Welcome to Prophy Plays. I'm Prophy, and this is another D&D with Kids update. Um, I will say this is the last one that I can guarantee getting out with any kind of regularity, just because I'm going to cover up to where we are at this point in the campaign. Next step, I know at least one of my kids is very keen on the idea of recording the session so you can see what it's like for running D&D for my kids. And then that may possibly give you some ideas of whether it's something you want to try yourself. You can see some of kind of the modifications you might have to make from how you might otherwise want to run, right? That kind of thing. So you can see what it looks and feels like. But until then, we have this update first. So just to remind you of where we last left off, Balasar, the prince, uh, who is apparently in exile or something. It doesn't seem like they necessarily have a bad relationship with the king, but at the very least, he is not anywhere near the capital. He's hanging out instead with Isaac the Cold-Blooded Killer, the person who was falsely accused of killing the king, who in fact was never even killed. So, every time I say it, okay, it's just funny. Okay. Anyway, so the two of them were in the little village of Willowwell, where they ended up getting captured by an evil cult. But they managed to escape by calling upon their orc friends that they had made previously. However, the cult leader tried to escape this fight, which led Isaac the Cold-Blooded Killer, lawful good, to start a forest fire. Later, they failed to fight this forest fire, and so the whole village of Willowwell had to flee to a larger city, not too terribly far away on the coast, a city by the name of Beech Wharf. And that is where we're picking up today. And so, just so you know, the city of Beech Wharf, I used again Worlds Without Number to create this city. And what I rolled on this was that one, it's a fortified city. So I figured, all right, so that's obvious enough what that means. But another is that it's built on ancient ruins, right? So I was thinking some about this, and I imagined, well, it'd be kind of cool if it was built out of some kind of like quartz plasticky kind of material, right? So imagine like we have right these buildings made largely of like white stone that exist and are just totally abandoned, and like the modern people in D&D terms, right, found this area and moved into it. Right. And then have also like added to it and built on it. So a lot of the architecture is this combination of kind of the white stone, right, but then also built on with wood or like more standard like gray stone, that kind of stuff. And then naturally the city has walls because it is fortified. It is also right up against a coastline that just and thus the name Beach Wharf. So it's right up against a coastline as well, right? So that's kind of where it is in terms of kind of the geography of it all. Okay, right. So within the city of Beech Wharf, there are really kind of two major factions that historically have had a significant role, and that'd be tied to these two major traits. That is, it's a fortified city, which means I decided the city guard is going to be more or less kind of the political authority. It's really the captain of the guard that is running things here, right? And then there's also the academy where all the mages. I have a specific name for them. I don't recall off the top of my head what that academy is called. Right, but in any case, so there's the Academy of Mages as well, and they are in really the biggest tower, which I've decided is called the Spire. Right, so they are like in the Spire, which is purely like the old quartz material. They kind of took that over as their home base. Yeah. Also in this city, we have recently the Order of Light has established a mission here. Right, so they're trying to establish in this space. So in come right, all of the refugees from Willowwell, along with our adventurers Balasar and Isaac the Cold-Blooded Killer. So I decided for the first adventure in the city of Beech Wharf is going to be dealing with the fact that now we have all of these people moving in, right? Right. So the captain of the guard, right, approaches right Isaac and Balasar and says, "Hey, I could use your help. We have all these refugees coming in," and they immediately jump and say, "Oh, you must have to build housing for them." Right? Well, it turns out Balasar is a prince. He can just get in touch with the king and they can send all kinds of resources to help build new like housing for these people after that evil cult burnt down their village. Yes, it was definitely not Isaac the Cold-Blooded Killer that started the forest fire that made us all leave. Right, okay, right. At which point the captain of the guard says, "Well, that's nice, but no, that's not what we need. Uh, because we're built on ancient ruins, we have plenty of space. Just a lot of it is underground at this point, so we're going to have to clear out some of that space." And I literally give them a rats in the basement mission. Right. So to do this, I actually have got into kind of making very cheap cardboard terrain, that kind of stuff. So I was inspired by there's a company which I saw on Trevor Duvall's Me, Myself, and Die channel. He reviewed one of their things. I forget the name of the company, unfortunately. But what they have are basically it's just boxes, which then you can either set so that they're kind of an enclosed room, right? And then you can clip these together with doorways, right? That kind of thing, right? Or you can flip them over, and then it acts as a building. But I looked at it, I thought, one, neat. Two, super easy to make, right? So I broke out some old cereal boxes, started cutting them up, hot gluing things together. I slapped some print and paste kind of textures on them, and these work pretty well. So I thought, okay, let's try playing with this, right? So I just have kind of my stack of rooms there, and then just as they would open a door, I'd randomly decide what the next room was going to be in terms of its size and what was going to be in it. And this seemed to work reasonably well. Now, how the rats in the basement mission worked, right? So they were told, okay, we have this little shop over here. There's a way downstairs there. They really don't use the basement at all. So go down to the basement, clear it out, and we can build some, convert this into temporary housing for the refugees that are coming in. Right, so they go down, and sure enough, there are swarms of rats here. And I specifically use the rat swarm um, stats, mostly because it was about the right difficulty level, as opposed to just having individual rats, which would have been too easy. Right, so I had swarms of rats there. Of course, in true Isaac the Cold-Blooded Killer and Balasar fashion, what happened was they go down underneath, and they see, oh, okay, there are these swarms of rats here. Isaac the Cold-Blooded Killer runs in, right, guns blazing effectively, right, although not particularly effectively, because he's alone, right, while Balasar is kind of hanging back in the hallway, right? So right, naturally, he's trying to fight this swarm of rats. They're themselves not particularly dangerous, except there's just one of him, and it's a swarm of rats, and he's rolling really badly while the rats are rolling really well. So he gets taken out, right? He's making death saves, right? Balasar runs in, drags him out. As many of these fights end up going. They do manage, right, eventually to clear all the rats out of the basement so that they can get their reward, right, or whatever. Right. Right. So anyway, uh, at this point, an important thing happened. That is, they got enough XP between the two of them. Right, so the way that I do XP, right, rather than trying to count it up by, oh, you were the one that actually encountered this monster, that you didn't encounter that monster, none of that. I do actually use XP rather than milestone for leveling up. I don't know why, I just like it. There we go. So it's the way I was raised when I first started playing D20 Star Wars 3 years ago or whatever it is, right? So XP is what we use. And that also lets me kind of get some sense of when they're going to start leveling up, that kind of thing. Anyway, so they level up to third level. Now, another important thing had happened in the D&D universe related to my children, and that is that my wife and I decided we would let them watch Honor Among Thieves, the Dungeons and Dragons movie. They loved it. It was great. But they also decided the wild shape is awesome, and therefore they need to become druids. Well, good news for Balasar. He has reasonably good stats, right? So his ability levels are such that he can multi-class. Right? So he takes he's 2 levels of sorcerer and 1 level of druid now. He doesn't get to wild shape yet, but he's on that path. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes further down the druid path and the sorcerer thing just kind of falls by the wayside. Isaac also decides that he would kind of like to do this, except his stats that he rolled were pretty bad. So at the moment, like the one stat that he has high enough to be able to multiclass into anything is that his intelligence is fairly high, which would allow you to multiclass into wizard, but he's already a wizard, so he can't. Right. So I told him he was very disappointed in this. So well, you do get some ability increases when you get to fourth and eighth level, that kind of thing. So you could start trying to bump those up, so that you can maybe right multi-class later on, right as your character develops. Anyway, so he was disappointed, but that's okay. Right. Anyway, so they have now leveled up. They're now both level 3, right? A level 3 wizard and a level 2 sorcerer, level 1 druid, right? Cross class. All right. So they dealt with the rats in the basement, and that got them in contact, right, with the one faction that is the city guard. So I need to get them in contact with the other faction, which in some ways makes more sense for them to be in contact with. They're both significant magic users. We have sorcerer, druid, and wizard. Surely they should get in touch with the magical academy in some way, right? So the next session, which is the last one that I've run at this point, they're approached by an apprentice wizard that is involved here with the Academy of Cravius. That's it. Yeah, so the Academy of Cravius. He comes. His name's Womson. He says, "I I was told right to come get you by the head mage of the academy. Right, he heard that a couple magic users came to town. What he wants you to do, right, is to go and find this magical blade, right, that he needs for some reason. He's not disclosed that to us, but he needs you to go do this." Right, so it's going to be like a classic kind of dungeon crawl, but except that I'd figured out by now that putting the wizard and the sorcerer druid into a dungeon is a bad idea because they work best at range, and you don't have range when you're stuck in this little 8 inch by 8 inch, 40 foot by 40 foot. Thinking in terms of not the game pieces, but in terms of the world, that's not a good place to be, right, for a wizard and a sorcerer slash druid. Right, so they decided instead the dungeon was going to be a forest. Right, so they have to go out right into this forest where they're going to be fighting various things. Right, so I had three different encounters that they could run into. Right, some skeletons, some shadows, a spectre. Right, that was what I decided to do to get them some additional XP, and also to stick with the theme because I really want there to be this idea that there are undead all over the place, and this is weird. Right, so they ran into skeletons, they ran into shadows, they ran into a specter. Right. And the way that I decided this was going to work was that the um, the sword that they're supposed to get, right, is actually in this like forested grave. Where I imagined something very much like, say, we have Snow White in a coffin, right, that kind of thing in the old Disney movie, right? So the same kind of thing. Right? So this person is lying on a slab, right, with their body holding their magical blade. Right? And that's the blade, of course, that the head mage of the academy wants. Right? But of course, when you try to take it, Spectre gets mad at you. So we can then have this fight happen. Yeah. Right. So that is where we are at this point. Right. So they go, right, they get this blade from find out it was an old druid who had died. Right. It's a bronze scimitar. It's not particularly powerful. It's like a +1, that kind of thing. Right. But they get it, they bring it back to the academy. Now here is where some important stuff happens in terms of information and in terms of character development. There's one thing that was very clear is that one of the goals that it's not Balasar, that my son playing Balasar has, is that he really wanted to get other people in the party. He loves this idea of getting other people in the party. I'm not going to run a GM and a GM PC. I'm not going to do that. Right, so just to get this concept, if you're not familiar, so a GM PC, so GM would be the game master, right, playing D&D, so technically DM dungeon master, right? So a DM PC would be the dungeon master is effectively playing a player character as well as running the rest of the world. Right now, this is something there can be pluses and minuses to this. It could be a way to say flesh out a relatively small party because I do have only two players. 2 players is small enough that they have a hard time a lot of the time, especially because the two players in my case have very similar classes. They kind of would serve the same role, right? So they don't, while they may have one wizard that's willing to act like a barbarian in terms of running into to a fight, in terms of their stats and abilities, th- that's not what they they have the capability to do. Right, so having a GMPC would allow us to flesh that out some, right? So as soon as they meet Womson, they're like, "Hey, do you want to join our party?" He says, "No, no, I can't do that. I have way too many responsibilities, right, with the academy." Right. But what I decided to give them, to kind of throw them a bone a little bit, is to give them pets. I knew that my son, that has been trying to recruit people into his party for a while, would love this idea because he likes the idea of animals. He doesn't like them in reality, but he does like the idea of animals, right? So animal videos are fantastic for him. Actually, touching animals, not so great. But and here this is all theater of the mind, right? So we can have whatever we want, right? So I gave them pseudo dragons, which I thought one thematically very appropriate because they are dragonborn themselves, right? And then these are also something. It's not like oh, you have a cat, right? Because pseudo dragons are somewhat intelligent. They're also telepathic, right? So they can communicate, right, in simple ways, right, with each other. Another thing that I did as well is I let them have a more extended conversation, right, with Womson because they clearly this was something that was kind of a decision in the moment, right? Was they clearly liked Womson a lot, which I was very happy with, right? So because I want him to be somewhat a likable character, a likable, trustworthy character that is actually going to be helpful rather than going to betray them, that kind of thing. Right? So they had a more extended conversation with him because I realized they did actually like him, and I allowed him to share some information. Right? So things like, have you noticed there are lots of like undead things in your adventures? Because this is something we've been having here, right? Suddenly we're having a bunch of skeletons and ghosts and these kinds of things show up. It's weird that this is all happening. Right. And then the boys could say, "Oh, well, yes, right. We actually had to fight skeletons and zombies. Interesting, right? Right. Well, is there something we can do about that? Because again, my kids, they're new to D&D. They don't know that, for example, clerics have this ability to turn the undead, so they don't know that it might make sense, right, for them to try to get like a cleric on board with them or something like that, right? So that's something then that Wamsa could tell them. It could tell them, oh, well, it takes a very special kind of magic, which we don't really study that much here, because radiant magic is something that like wizards as a class really don't have much access to it. It's hard for them to find spells that actually overlap with those abilities. On the other hand, clerics get it all the time. Right? So that's not really something we have, but right, these are the type of people you might want to look for. Right? So I could provide here a helpful character providing them with genuine information that they could potentially use later on, right? So I think that I'm learning kind of how to deal with the fact that I'm dealing with novice players with very suboptimal characters, right? And not necessarily always trusting the math and the DMG, right? Because I know it's not entirely trustworthy, but you have to have a starting place, right? Right. So I do still use that as my starting place, and I think I'm getting better at figuring out how to tailor the surroundings, right? So don't put them in enclosed spaces all the time unless I want them to really be in trouble, or unless I really lighten up the difficulty of the enemies they're facing. Because that's something that we have to adjust to. And also, like, I'm not expecting my kids to understand, right, some of the more complicated tactical rules, things like flanking. Now, if at some point they say, gee, maybe we should try surrounding this enemy, you go on one side, I'll go on the other side, I would totally give them advantage just as the rules say I should. But that's something where I don't think that balance, like the way that I think the math is assumed to work when you do the math for the DMG is that you have players that are very tactical. And you also have a GM that is very tactical, right? So it's designed this way. So then my choice is either, right, uh, either I have to like just kill my kids' characters all the time till they figure this out, right? Or I have to like nerf the monsters, which in some ways is possible, but is also makes things less interesting, right? So like we're leveling up, and for some reason we're still fighting three or four skeletons all the time. Right? Yeah, it's still hard, right? Uh, But it feels like you're not making much progress. So being able to swap that out. And so then the question is, do I play them suboptimally? Do they give them fewer hit points? That kind of thing. And I really don't want to do that. I like creating a still genuine experience that they can enjoy, and that at the same time is dangerous. I want there to be a sense of danger, even if I don't want their characters to necessarily be on the verge of death as often as they often are. Right? And so that's something that's it's tricky to figure out. Right? That's a balance that we have to strike. Right? So, in any case, that's where things rest right now. I'm thinking about what's going to be happening next time. At the moment, I do have some of the faction turn stuff that happened. I guess I can update you on that. So I have right now right, in the action in the factions. So that we have the Beach Wharf guards, right? So they're in the process of kind of hiring more guards, right? Building up their local strength. The Academy of Cavius, right? One of the things that they've been doing is kind of sending out. Uh, to try to establish other bases of operations around here. So there's another city they've sent some seers to, again using the Worlds Without Number rules for faction turns here. The Order of Light, they're also establishing right more missions around the kingdom, and then the king in the kingdom itself is also right kind of moving troops around to strengthen itself. Well, one thing I realized when I decided to start using the faction turns is that by design, you either have to, with Worlds Without Number, you either have to like give some significant advantages to certain factions to get the world to make sense, or we have to have a world that where all the factions are kind of weak to start. So I decided to say that all the factions are kind of weak to start. Now, some have more resources, but they don't necessarily have more presence. So that's what I decided was that the Order of Light and the Kingdom of Hildreth. Hildreth is the name of the kingdom, so I'm just the king, the royalty here. Those two groups have access to more significant resources than the more local factions do, even if they don't necessarily have a strong presence all throughout the kingdom. So it kind of creates this interesting thing where there are lots of resources flowing to these factions, even though they're not necessarily present everywhere just yet. Right? So we're seeing kind of how that works. And I also have a couple like characters in the background doing things. Like one of the things that was revealed by the pseudo dragons, and also by a passive perception check for I want to say it was Balasar, right? Was that there's something weird about the head mage for the academy, right? He smells funny, kind of smells like death. So what that means is something that's going to be coming up, not in the next session. Not ready to deal with that. Um, but I think it'll be fun once we get there. But it's gonna take a while, right, for them to actually be able to deal with that. I hope it doesn't take too terribly long, but I think it'll take a while for them to deal with that. So I look forward to that, and I think that in terms of my design, I'm very inspired. I think by Professor Dungeon Master of our Dungeon Craft, and one of the things that he suggests is that you should have a satisfying end at every session, right? So that every session, or maybe two, right? Uh, there's kind of a clear episode that's going on. So it could be something like there's a forest fire, we need to fight the forest fire, and we either succeed or we don't. If we do, great. If we don't, we need to flee. Right. So there's a very clear, like self-contained storyline. And because I'm playing with a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, neither of whom have particularly long um, attention spans, right, I have like an hour and a half. It's the length of a session. Which if you've been playing D&D for a while, you know that that's on the short side. uh More often we play 3 4 hour sessions, and that was the way that I played in college when I was first learning to play. I didn't actually, I think I played D&D once in college with a bunch of other games. Yeah, but normally we would meet minimum 2 hours. Typically 3 hours or so was much more common. My kids don't have the patience for that. Like they already start kind of infighting, that kind of thing, with relatively short sessions. So I'm not going to. ask them to try to sit through 3 hours of playing. Right? So I need to figure out how do I make really short episodes, right? But at the same time, I like to have background story that is driving things, right? So that there will be kind of a sense of progression over time, right? Moving toward some kind of resolution so that looking back, you can see, oh, it looks like all these pieces actually do fit together in some way, right? Even though as you go through it, right, each piece does stand on its own, right? So I think that that's something. It's a it's something that takes a while to learn, takes a lot of thought for how can we do this, and really, I think it comes down to one, how do you design the world, and the world should be designed in such a way that there are characters and factions that the players are not ready to face. And these should be present, but should not be a threat too quickly. Right. So that is something that I've been thinking about is how do I put not necessarily a big bad, but a medium bad in here that that two level three characters are not yet ready to face. They will be ready when they get to level five, right? That kind of thing. Right. So it's something I think worth thinking about from the game master or DM's perspective. How do we create an overarching story with a big bad or medium bad, whatever level of bad you want, that is present but not a threat immediately, and then allow these little mini episodes to play out. Right? Another thing that does, which I kind of like, is that we don't have a set schedule on which we play. That's where I have no idea when the next of these types of videos is going to come, whether it be a live session or whether it be my reflections on a session that we hold. Uh, we don't know. Normally it's on a weekend because that's when the kids are home, and that's when we can often find an hour and a half. But sometimes we have other stuff going on, right? So it's not clear when things are going to happen, and that's okay because we plan these episodes. So there is no, oh no, we ended on a cliffhanger. It doesn't really happen, right? Which in some sense it's kind of sad because they may feel less driven to come and engage again, but at the same time I'm comfortable with that because I don't feel disappointed if we don't play for a few weeks, which has been the case recently. We've just had lots of stuff going on. People have been sick in our household, and between people being sick for quite a while and having lots of other things happening, we just haven't had time as a family to sit down and play. And that just happens. And that's fine. And I think that being able to say that's fine is important for me psychologically. So the episodic format helps. Yeah. All right, so this video has gone on, I think, long enough. So uh, these are my thoughts. Certainly, anything here you might possibly find useful, use, right? We are here, after all, to inspire each other. So, hope you enjoyed it, and this is Coffee signing off.